Today, we want to talk about musical notes. Musical notes are nothing but symbols used to represent the duration of musical sounds. Imagine if 5 kilometers can be represented with a symbol, and 10 kilometers with another symbol, and 20 kilometers with another symbol. That's just what musical notes are like in the realm of music. So we have different symbols we use to represent the duration of a musical sound, and they are just relative. They are relative. So we usually use something to denote the length of a musical sound. So if one sound lasts for this long, we can say, okay, it refers to this musical note. But it's relative. We have the musical notes, we have semi-brief, we have minim, we have crotchet, we have quaver, we have semi-quaver, we have demi-semi-quaver, and we have hemi-demi-semi-quaver. Okay, so just see this semi-brief note as one orange, okay, as one orange. If you divide the orange into two, you have two halves. So the two halves will be two minims. So two minims will make one semi-brief. Half of a semi-brief is a minim. Two minims will make one semi-brief. If you divide the same orange into four. That's dividing the meaning into two equal parts to create four equal parts of the semi-brief. You will have a crotchet each. So a crotchet is like a quarter of a semi-brief. A crotchet is a quarter of a semi-brief. One minim is half of a semi-brief, which means two crochets will make one minim, but four crochets will make one semi-brief. If you divide the crochet further, you have eight quavers. If you divide each of those crochets further, you have eight quavers. So eight quavers will make one semi-brief, but four quavers will make a minim, and two quavers will make a crochet. Means 16 semiquavers will make a semi-brief, 8 semiquavers will make a minim, 4 semiquavers will make a crotchet, and 2 semiquavers will make a quiver. In the same way, you have demi-semiquaver. 32 demi-semiquavers will make a semi-brief. 16 demi-semiquavers will make a minim. 8 demi-semiquavers will make a crotchet. 4 demi-semiquavers will make a quiver. 2 demi-semiquavers will make a semiquiver. So that is how it goes. And the same thing with demi-semiquiver. You have 64 of it to make one semi-brief, 32 of it to make one minim, 16 of it to make one crochet, 8 of it to make one quiver, 4 of it to make one semiquiver, 2 of it to make one demi-semiquiver, and so on and so forth. So that is how musical notes are related to one another. So if I have a semi-brief sounding for like 8 seconds, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's simple now to understand that a meaning will just take 4 seconds. If a semi-brief sounds for 8 seconds, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It means that a meaning will last for just 4 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Which means two meanings will give you a semi-brief. You have to have two meanings combined to give you two halves of a semi-brief to give you a semi-brief. That's two meanings. So in the same way, crotchets will have 2 seconds each. Crotchets will have 2 seconds each. So you will need four crochets to make a semi-brief to 2 seconds to give you 8 seconds. So whatever semi-brief gives you determines what others will get. And that's why semi-brief is named whole note. That's the whole note. Is when you now divide it, other people get their own divisions. So semi-brief is the whole note. If you divide whatever semi-briefs you sound, it will give you what meaning is when you divide it into two equal parts. And if you keep dividing like that, you get other musical notes. A crochet will be a semi-brief divided into four equal parts. If you hear that a semi-brief is 16 seconds, you should know that a crochet in that light should give you only 4 seconds. And so on. I'm using seconds so that you understand it. In writing music, there's something called metronome, telling you the number of crochets that we should have in a particular um, music or a dotted crotchets, depending how many of it you should have in a second. That will now give you the idea of what a semi-brief should look like and so on. But here we're just using relative terms and it's very relative. Semi-brief doesn't have a fixed duration, but whatever the semi-brief is determines what the rest will be. Just know that semi-brief divided into two will give you two meanings. A crochet divided into two will give you two quavers. A minim divided into two will give you two crochets. When you add up four quavers, you get one minim, and when you add up eight quavers, you get one semi-brief. Just understand the mathematics like that. It's division and division. You keep dividing. That is musical notes and how they are related to one another. Musical notes are placed on a staff. Now, musical notes help us to determine the duration of a musical sound, but they don't tell us the sound, what the sound is. They just tell us whatever the sound is, this should be the duration. So when we place a musical note on a staff, it helps us to know the duration. But for us to know the musical sound that should last for that long, we place the musical note on a staff. Wherever you place a musical note determines what it will sound. If you place it on G, it becomes G. That musical note becomes G. So if the musical note is to sound for like 4 seconds, for instance, and you place that musical note on G, second line of the treble staff, for instance, it means that G should sound for 4 seconds. The musical note is already giving you the number of seconds, but where it is placed tells you the pitch. Of course, the two things we need while reading music basically is the pitch and the duration. So the particular musical note placed on a staff determines the duration of that sound. But where it is placed, it determines the sound itself. So if it's placed on a line, the line should cut across it, whether it's a semi-brief or a minim. The line should cut across the head of the note. The head of the note for a semi-brief is that circular part. The head of the note for a meaning is the circular part, not necessarily the line joining it at one part of it. That circular part, the part that oval shape is where the concentration is on. If the note should be on a line, then the oval shape should have the line cutting across it. Then if it should be on a space, the oval shape should be within that space and no line should cut across it. That's how to place a note on a line or on a shape on a space. Whether the oval shape is shaded or not doesn't matter in the case of quavers and the rest. But the important thing is a line should cut across a note that has to be on a line and a note that has to be on a space. None of the lines of the staff should cut across it. And so wherever it's placed, if it's placed on A, it means it's pitch A. Remember, those alphabets on the staff are actually pitches. If you go to the keyboard, you discover that all the keys of the keyboard are named with alphabets too. So those alphabets are linked to a keyboard to help you understand how they are related. But that's not what our focus for now. Just understand that a musical note placed on a staff determines the duration, and where it is placed determines the sound that it is expected to produce. Notes placed above the third line usually have the stem pointing downwards. Notes placed below the third line usually have the stem pointing upwards. Notes on the third line either points up or down, and this is applicable to both treble and bass staff. The third line is the marking point. Anything on the third line can go up or down. Anything below the third line always points up, point downward. Anything below the third line usually points upwards. Also, musical notes above the staff, that's on ledger spaces or ledger lines, point downwards, while musical notes below the staff, that is on ledger spaces or ledger lines below a staff, point upwards. In practice, we can make these musical notes get connected somehow as a group, just the same way footballers throw their arms on each other while waiting before a football match starts, the way they usually stay together and put their hands on each other, either to snap a photograph or to sing their anthem or just a pose they usually take, throwing their hands on each other's shoulders, something like that. That is a way of grouping them, right? So in music, we can group notes. We only group notes that have what we call a flag. Notes that has flags are grouped together. So we can have three quavers grouped together, and those three quavers grouped together are still three quavers. It doesn't reduce or add anything to them. They're just quavers that are grouped together. And they're usually grouped to show that they are moving in the same way or that they represent a unit group of a rhythmic expression. We're going to talk now about dotted notes. Dotted notes are simply notes that have dots attached to them. Of course, there are different dots that can be found around a musical note. For instance, we have staccatos, okay? But that's not our concentration today. We want to talk about dotted notes, and dotted notes are notes that have dots placed on their right side. On the right side of the note, you have a dot, and those dots increase the duration of the musical notes. The dots increase the duration of the musical notes. What does a dot do? It adds half of the value of that note to the note. So if I have a musical note like a semibreve, you know that half of a semibreve is a meaning. So if I have a semibreve as a dotted note, if I add a dot to a semibreve, it means the semibreve have been expanded from its original value with an addition of the note that is half of its value, which is a meaning. I'll give you an example. If semi-brief is 4 seconds in duration and minimum is 2 seconds, it means a dotted semi-brief will be 6 seconds because minimum is half of semi-brief, so you just add half of the value to it. And the way musical notes are arranged, each note is half of the one above it. Each note is half of the one above it. So half of a semi-brief is a minim, half of a minim is a crotchet, half of a crotchet is a quiver, half of a quiver is a semi-quiver, half of a semi-quiver is a demi-semi-quiver, and so on. So if I have a semi-brief dotted, it means I have the duration of semi-brief and a minim together. If I have a dotted minim, it means I have the duration of a minim and a crotchet all together. If I have a dotted crotchet, it means I have the duration of a crotchet and a quiver together. If I have a dotted quiver, it means I have the duration of a dotted a quiver and a semiquiver. That is what a dotted note is. We can have double dots, a double dotted note, meaning that we have two dots instead of one. In this case, you are adding half of the value of the second note. If I have a semibreve as 4 seconds, a minim as 2 seconds, and a crotchet as 1 second, it means that if I put a double dot on a semibreve, it means semibreve, first dot will give me half of a semibreve, which is a minim. Second dot will give me half of a minim, which is a crotchet. So the second dot gives you half of what the first dot is, half of the value of the first dot. So if I have a dotted crotchet, it means it's a crotchet plus a quiver, which is half of a crotchet, and a semiquiver, which is half of a quiver. So the second dot adds the value of what the first dot actually is. Musical rests are simply a period of silence in music. In music, we don't have tones playing all the time. We don't have tones playing all the time. Sometimes you have some rest, some period of silence before you hear a tune again. Sometimes one part can be singing and the other part is silent. And then when the first part is done, the second part will now start singing. That it's like that in music. So we have what we call musical rests. And musical rest is just a period of silence. So the way it is written, the musical rest has a symbol for its equivalent musical notes. So if I have a semi-brief note, I have a semi-brief rest. If I have a minim note, I'll have a minim rest. If I have a crotchet note, I will have a crotchet rest. They will have the same duration. The only difference is that musical note tells you how long a musical note will sound. Like if I have a semi-brief note, it tells me how long the semi-brief note will sound. But a musical rest tells you how long it shouldn't sound, how long there should be silence, how long this note is supposed to stay without producing sound. So we have semi-brief note, semi-brief rest, minim note, minim rest, crotchet note, crotchet rest. The important thing to note is that this rest has the same duration with the equivalent musical note. So if I have a crotchet rest, it should give me the same period of silence as a crotchet note would sound. If a crochet note should sound for 4 seconds, it means that a crochet rest should be silent for 4 seconds. So that's what musical rests are. In case you encounter them in music, you know how to harmonize the different signs you're seeing. You know what each of them stand for. This same principle applies to dotted rests. So a dotted semibreve will have the same duration with a dotted semibreve rest. A dotted semibreve note will have the same duration with a dotted semibreve rest. So if a dotted semibreve note should sound for 6 seconds, for instance, it also means that a dotted semibreve rest will be silent for 6 seconds. If a crotchet note that is dotted, a dotted crotchet note will sound for 4 seconds, what it means is that a dotted crotchet rest will be silent for 4 seconds. Just the same principle.